Hello, this is part 1 of the assembly guide for the Squareboi cartridge. In this video, we'll put together the mainboard. Before starting, it's always a good idea to check the board over, see if all the pads are in place, and if there's no damage to any traces. We'll start with the resistors. They are all quarter watt, 20 kiloohm resistors. I'll be bending their leads beforehand using this little 3D printed tool. We will use 9 resistors in total. I will now insert the resistors into the board one by one, making sure they are centered and well seated against it. I always try to make it so all resistors face the same way. This is not strictly necessary, but it does make the end result a little neater. I would also like to take this moment to apologize if the board is not always in frame, or if my shoulder joints are not as neat as they could be. I'm not used to working with a camera in my workbench, and it's a bit of a learning experience. I will now gently bend the leads of the resistors outwards in order to hold them in place. Time to start soldering. I'm using an iron at 320 Celsius with a wedge-shaped tip and standard 1 mm thick lead-based solder with a rosin core. Feel free to go with whatever technique you feel most comfortable with. I've accidentally made a cold joint. I'll remove the solder with liquid flux and a bit of copper wick, then try again. I'll crop all the leads using a pair of flush cutters. It's important not to cut too close to the base to not damage the solder joints. If I feel I've hit any, I'll reflow them with my iron and some flux. I'll add the power LED. I'll use a pair of pliers to bend the leads so it sits flat against the board. Note that the longer, positive lead should go into the bottom hole. I'll splay the leads apart to hold it in place until it is soldered. By only soldering one of the legs at first, I can adjust the LED's position until I'm happy with it. Next, I'll place the CPLD socket. Note the arrow in the center, which indicates which side should face up. I'll insert it into the board, then hold it in place with a piece of blue painter's tape. I will solder a few pins, then check again to make sure it's sitting flush against the board. The socket has small pins that are quite close together. If you are having difficulties with this section, it might be worthwhile to switch to a finer tip on your iron. I'll check over my work. If any joints look inadequate, I'll add a bit of liquid flux and reflow them. I'll install the dip switch facing outwards. I'll reuse the piece of painter's tape to hold it in while I solder it. I'll check over my work and make sure both toggles operate correctly. I'll install the JTAG header. Make sure you insert it with the notch facing outward. This piece of tape is now nearing the end of its life. It should still suffice to hold the header in place. for just a few moments. I'll install the capacitors. I'll bend down the one in the corner, so it is less likely to get caught on objects as the cartridge is handled. If you're using dip memory, this is when you'd install a socket, like this one. Make sure it's oriented correctly, so that the notch faces up. For this build, however, I'll be using surface mount memory, which requires pin headers instead. I'll be using the holes in the board as a length guide, then cutting the header to size. I'll then trim the edges so that they are nice and smooth. Make sure you install the header in the outermost row of holes, or it won't fit the daughter board. Look down the length of the board to make sure the header is vertical. I usually solder just the two outer pads at first, so I can make adjustments if necessary. Make sure to verify your work and touch up any pins that might be in need of a reflow. The 4-pin header is quite small and can be easy to misalign. Take extra care when soldering it, so that you don't have any problems installing the ROM board later. The RAM board headers are installed in much the same manner. Finally, it's time to install the auxiliary power header. If using a keyed header, make sure the tab faces outward. And that should be it. I would recommend washing the board with isopropyl alcohol to remove any leftover flux, but it is otherwise ready to receive the CPLD in whatever daughter boards you might be using. Over the course of the next few videos, I will show you how to build the ROM and RAM boards, as well as the programmer, and final assembly for the whole system. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope this was of use to you.